We know that the United States Constitution was written to protect free speech. Is that protection simply a political idea, or is it something greater, something biblical, something spiritual?
Let's see what the Bible says about that.
The founding fathers of the United States wrote our founding documents to protect the individual's right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Mm-hmm. And written into that was the right to speak and the freedom to speak, even and especially when it was counter to that of your neighbor or even to that of the government. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Even the right for gun ownership to protect yourself against an imposing, threatening government.
Yeah.
I mean,
they are writing that. The government leaders are writing that.
They're writing that. They're trying to protect the individual from them, the government.
Yes.
Yeah. What a change we've come to today. Yeah. And again, our nation's born out of this idea and a need. It wasn't just an idea, it was a reality of people that did not want to be ruled by another king, mm-hmm. King George and the British. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to be overtaxed and not have representation. Yeah. They don't want to be told how to worship, when they could worship, where they were to worship. They didn't want to be told what they could say, what they could not say. They wanted to have the freedom to speak, to worship, to act, to own, to produce, to sell, to trade, and not be governed excessively by a government.
Yeah, and that, again, in 1776, free speech was foundational to the nation's even like existence and to the start of it, to the early days of it. And like, it was the bedrock. Yeah. It was the foundation to anything going forward.
Yeah. It's baked into their existence.
Yes.
We have been controlled. We've been manipulated. We've been overtaxed. Let's write a new nation's laws and constitution that does not have any of that and protects us from ever having that again.
Yes. So that's the foundation of our nation. But here we are returning to the days where those that are in the government are limiting speech, saying, hey, we're trying to limit speech. Hey, we want to limit speech. Hey, elect us and we will limit your speech. Wow. You know, like that's what people are running on these days. Yeah. And it is not just a political issue, but it's a very deeply spiritual issue because, I mean, lots of reasons, you know, but like for today's day and age, it is offensive to some whenever you say things, whenever you say anything, whenever you speak out against someone, and therefore it's labeled as hate speech, and then therefore you should be charged with a crime, and you need to pay for what you said because you offended someone.
You offended someone. You hurt their feelings. So speech, therefore, needs to be limited.
Yes, it can't be totally free because you might offend someone, right? Today, speaking the truths of God like we're doing here, like we do at our church, speaking the truths of God and the scriptures has been labeled as bigoted. It's been labeled as disinformation. It's been labeled as hateful. It's been labeled as false, you know? And so to do that and to call other people to account is bad. It's wrong.
Right.
And it should be limited. It should be throttled.
Right.
You should not be allowed to speak.
Yeah. You shouldn't be able to post that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's the truth or not.
No.
You shouldn't be allowed to because it might offend. It might hurt.
Yes.
You know, today, speaking out against the government and governmental laws regarding their narrative or whatever their truth, you know, the truth that they're trying to push is, or about whatever healthcare is best and all this stuff, you know, that's labeled disinformation and therefore needs to be throttled, needs to be, you know, like
when we
negated.
saw this, we saw this especially during the whole COVID era. You know, if you ever posted anything that went against what was the governmental mandates at the time, then that was labeled as disinformation, and you were viewed as a threat to the whole of the nation, to the good of the people. Yeah. And this whole thing starts from there, but it just spreads because anything then that you posted that went against the narrative was viewed as disinformation.
And that's the big thing, is it's like hate speech and disinformation and, hey, you're going against what the leadership here is, therefore we need to throttle you. It's like that's why there was a revolution.
Exactly.
Back in 1776, they said, hey, we're speaking the truth. You're telling us we're wrong, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
we're going to fight for free speech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we have a day today in which the individual's rights are elevated above everything at this point. And even if you misgender them by their pronoun, that's viewed as hate speech.
And you should be charged with being, you should get kicked out of where you are, fired from where you are, all this kind of stuff because you said the wrong thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Crazy. Yeah. If you're not celebrating someone else's lifestyle, then you're viewed as being hateful. And in this day, all of a sudden, disinformation has become the greatest evil.
Yes.
Saying the wrong thing, not going with the narrative, all of a sudden is the worst thing. And so free speech is no longer free.
No.
It is now exacted and controlled and watched, manipulated, throttled.
Yeah.
And everything you say and do, whether you're saying it in a conversation with someone, if you're saying it in a grocery store, if you're saying it online, if you're texting it, if you're saying it and your phone's hearing you, could be be used against you.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've all of a sudden entered an era where speech is not free.
Yes.
And when that happens, I think it's pretty clear that what's happening, this is no longer just a political issue.
No.
This is a deeply spiritual issue.
Yes, it is a political issue, but more than that, it is a spiritual issue.
It has a root deeper than that. Exactly. Yeah, when you think about this whole idea of having a free nation, be able to have a free nation in which the people are free and they can own, they can express, they can have worship, they can go where they want, do what they want, the right to even do all of that, it has to include the need to speak and even sometimes speak against an opposing idea.
Yes, exactly. It's like the whole idea for free speech is that free speech is only free when the people that you disagree with can speak.
It's true.
If the people you disagree with aren't allowed to say that, it's not free speech.
Right.
And other people then can't determine what is good and what is bad.
Right.
If the bad is always only throttled and there's only the good that people have, how can they ever know that it is good or why it is good or why they should continue to choose it? Because I think if you only always have the good, you're going to see something else and be like, wow, I've never even heard of that. All right, I'll just go to it,
Right.
And because this is new, wow, these people have compelling arguments and all that stuff. Instead of both being out there and, hey, look, this is the good and here's what they say. This is the bad and here's what they say. This is why we choose the good. That's what free speech is,
Exactly. Yeah, and so the only way you can ensure a nation's existence is to allow people to be free, to be able to speak up, even at times to speak up against the government, because we live in the world where men still need to be held accountable, men and women. And our whole governmental system was set up with a system of checks and balances, of accountability. And that requires that someone has to have the freedom to speak up and say, I disagree with that, and here's the reason why.
Yeah.
And in a sane culture, there should be the freedom for that and for ideas to be discussed without there being offense, without there being personal attack. And so an idea or an ideology should be able to stand on its own, and rational people discuss it back and forth and come to conclusions as to what is best and what is right. And in time, it is proven to be true.
And that's, I think the truth, people who stand in the truth, people who stand in the light, people who stand not hiding anything, not standing on lies, are not afraid of true free speech.
Yeah, right.
Because truth can stand in the face of disinformation. Truth can stand if someone is, like for our church, for example, we can stand up here and say the truth all day long.
Right.
And someone can come at us and be like, God's not real and Jesus was a liar.
The Bible
and all this,
can't be trusted.
All this kind of stuff. And we can say, hey, guess what? You're not hurting our feelings.
No.
You're wrong.
Right.
We are right. You have the right to say that, but we are right. They can say that all day long. It does not change the truths of what we teach. It does not change the narrative of the Bible. It does not change anything about it because it is the truth,
Yeah.
However, if we built a whole system on smoke and mirrors and, oh man, just buy into this and I promise you'll be raised up and all that stuff, and someone stood up against us, we'd be saying, no, you can't say that, because you're going to say something that could contradict our narrative. And so again, free speech should be championed by those who stand for the truth. And you should always, always, always be like, what's going on with you? If someone is saying, Now, I don't know if we should have free speech. You're going, what are you hiding, actually?
Yeah,
exactly. What are you actually trying to throttle? What are you trying to actually block away? You know what I'm saying?
That's true. And if you take away the right of free speech, then what you're doing is saying, all right, well, someone needs to be in control now of all speech.
Yes.
If there are some speech that is offensive and some speech that is hate speech, well, then someone has to define what that is. And whoever defines what that is, then it has to determine what are going to be the consequences. And they become the ones in control of all things at that point. They control the narrative. They control the storyline. They control the behavior.
They determine what truth is.
Exactly. Yes. They determine what stands, what does not.
Yeah.
And so they can then determine, oh, that's disinformation, and therefore you must be disciplined. Oh, that's hate speech. You must be punished. And what you're doing is then allowing a person or a small group of people to make that determination. And I think we've all seen that in recent years, even with social media. Pick your platform. I think there's been enough information to come out. We realize that some people have been throttling.
Oh, yeah.
The social medias have been throttled.
And they have said that.
And they've said it themselves.
Come out. Hey, I'm sorry. I've throttled actually things that shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Certain topics, certain words that are used get pushed down in an algorithm, and other words and phrases that are used get pushed up in the algorithm. So we're already living in the reality of the fact that free speech is being throttled, and it's being controlled by one person or a small group of people who are imposing their values upon everyone else's.
Yeah.
So we live in a nation that's the reality.
Yeah.
And whenever you have a nation that has turned its back on God, this is what you find. Yeah. You find a nation that, again, elevates government to the place of God status, who elevates CEOs and individuals to the place of God status, where they make the decisions and they control the mass of information and they control the people. That's happening in our day.
Yeah.
I think if any honest person would recognize, we've moved toward a place where government no longer exists for the people.
Yeah.
The people exist for the government, and the government has become God in many cases. I'm not attempting to diss every person who is involved in governmental affairs.
No.
There are godly politicians and governmental people in place, and I'm grateful for those. But the system as a whole has been elevated to a place where government has become provider, protector, and distributor of goods and resources, and the legislator of even thought in many places. And what we're watching today is those who have been elevated to positions of control over media, reinforcing the things that rebel against God and throttling those things that have any voice against the government, against the system, against the narrative.
Yeah, and that is, again, it's literally inverse democracy is what it is. Where democracy being where the people's voice is what shapes the culture.
Yes.
This is the inverse. The limiting of freedom of speech is the inverse of democracy, to where it is a certain group of people saying what you can and can't say, whereas democracy is, here's a group of people saying this is what will go. This is what we're voting towards.
Right.
We, the people, stand up and say this is what we're doing. You know, so to limit freedom of speech is inverse democracy, and it's evil. It is an evil thing.
It is. You're right. And the thing, you look at the scripture, you find every great man and woman of faith at some point had to speak out against the narrative and the system of the day.
Yes.
I mean, pick your character. Choose your character.
Yeah, exactly.
Any one of them, you find at some point they spoke up against the cultural norms, the philosophy of the day, whatever was the narrative, whatever was the religion of the day, they spoke up against it. And for that to happen, there had to be a sense of free speech. And they did it in places where it wasn't even allowed. God endorsed it, called for it, demanded it, commanded it for these people of faith, and they did it. So that tells me that if there is a group who is attempting to limit free speech, that they are acting in contradiction to the heart of God and the ways of God. And God will often raise up individuals, prophets, over time, who will be the ones who will speak freely. They'll pay the price for it because it's often against a culture that's limiting the speech. But that is what God calls men and women to do. And it is upon that our nation was born, out of a group of men and women who say, we will establish a nation in which the individual will be free. They'll be free to speak, not controlled by the government. They'll be free to earn. They'll be free to prosper. They'll be free to pursue life. The government will exist to protect their rights, not demand their allegiance. Therefore, I think we could conclude that attempting to limit free speech is inverse democracy. It is not just a political feature. It is a deeply spiritual issue.